Beneath the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of her porcelain throat like a lover's forbidden promise. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Silverfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant thunder. Ilara Voss, Princess of the Crimson Vale, had known exile before, but never like this. Cast out not by decree of her own kind, but by the cold indifference of a world that saw her as both relic and weapon. The vampires of her shadowed court had whispered of her tainted bloodline for centuries. Half human, they said, her veins diluted by some ancient mortal folly. But it was her refusal to bow to the endless wars of the night that sealed her fate. A princess without fangs, her brother had sneered, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian as he stripped her of her titles and left her to the mercy of the frozen wilds. No guards, no entourage, just the thin silk of her gown, torn at the hem from the frantic flight, and the weight of the lunar amulet around her neck, its silver chain cold against her skin. She stumbled through the snowdrifts, each step a betrayal of her immortal grace. The cold bit deeper than any blade. Vampires thrived in the chill, but this was a glacial fury, laced with the metallic tang of werewolf territory. The mountains were a no-man's land, where the packs of the Alpha Kings roamed under the same moon that mocked her isolation. Ilara's breath came in shallow clouds, not from exertion, her body defied fatigue, but from the ache in her chest, a hollow echo of rejection that no eternal life could silence. What was strength, if not the will to endure when all warmth fled the world? She clutched the amulet, its pendant a crescent moon etched with veins of crimson crystal, a heirloom from her mother, who had whispered of destinies woven in starlight and blood. It pulsed faintly now, as if alive, warming against the frost that clawed at her fingers. The forest thickened ahead, ancient pines bowing under mantles of ice, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Uivos distante ecoavam através do vale, não os uivos suaves de lobos comuns, mas algo primal, carregado de fúria e fome. Ilara paused, her bare feet sinking into the powder, the numbness spreading upward like venom. She had crossed the border at dusk, evading the patrols of her own kin, but the night deepened, and with it came the certainty of pursuit. Not from vampires, they would not dirty their hands in the snow, but from the beasts who claimed these lands as their eternal hunting grounds. The Alpha Kings, lords of fur and fang, had long eyed the vampire realms with predatory hunger. War simmered between their worlds, a fragile truce shattered by raids and betrayals, and she, discarded like chaff, was now prey in their domain. A flicker of firelight pierced the gloom ahead. A campfire, perhaps, or the glow of torches from a nomadic pack. Ilara's instincts screamed retreat, but exhaustion pulled her forward, the amulet's subtle heat a siren call against the encroaching dark. She moved like a shadow, silent despite the crunch of snow, her pale hair whipping in the gale like threads of moonlight. Memories flooded her, the opulent halls of the Crimson Vale, where crystal goblets brimmed with the vital essence of the fallen, and her father's throne, carved from obsidian veined with gold. He had been the one to teach her mercy in hushed tones amid the court's bloodlust. Power is not in the taking, daughter, but in the sparing. Yet mercy had branded her weak, a liability in the endless dance of dominance and decay. The wind shifted, carrying the musky scent of wolf, earth and musk overlaid with the sharp bite of iron and smoke. Ilara froze, her heightened senses painting the night in stark relief. The crackle of flames, the low murmur of voices, the rhythmic thud of paws circling a clearing. She crept closer, hidden by a ridge of snow-laden boulders, peering down into a hollow where figures gathered. Not just wolves, men, or something between, their forms shifting in the fire's dance. Armored in furs and steel, etched with runes that glowed faintly silver under the moon. At their center stood a towering silhouette, broad-shouldered and unyielding, his presence a storm contained. The Alpha King, she realized with a chill that rivaled the frost. Thorn Blackthorn, whispered terror of the packs, whose name evoked visions of ravaged borders and crimson snow. He had clashed with her kind before, his raids leaving villages of the undead in smoldering ruin. Why here, in this forsaken pass? To rally his warriors. Perhaps for the war her exile might unwittingly ignite. Ilara's hand tightened on the amulet, its crystal warming as if in warning. She should flee, melt back into the shadows where vampires belonged. But the fire's glow tugged at her, a rare beacon in the endless white. Hunger gnawed, not for blood, but for something deeper, a connection severed by her banishment. The king's voice rumbled then, low and commanding, cutting through the wind. The veil thins, brothers. Their princess wanders our lands ripe for the taking. Seize her, and we strike the heart of their empire. Laughter rippled among his men, coarse and triumphant, but Thorn's tone held no mirth, only the weight of calculated resolve, shadowed by something unspoken, a melancholy that lingered like smoke. Her heart, still, yet aching, stuttered in her chest. They knew of her flight. She was no random wanderer. She was bait, or worse, the spark to engulf both worlds in flame. The amulet burned hotter now, its crimson veins pulsing in time with the distant howls, as if the moon itself urged her onward. Ilara backed away, the snow muffling her retreat, but the path behind was lost to the blizzard's veil. Forward lay the wolves. Backward, the vampires who had forsaken her. In the silence between gusts, she felt the pull of destiny, fragile as a thread of blood on snow. Reject it and perish alone. Embrace it and risk everything. The night deepened, the moon fracturing further overhead, casting her shadow long and wavering across the drifts. Ilara pressed on, the amulet her only compass, into the heart of the storm where kings and exiles collided. The blizzard's fury wrapped around Ilara like a shroud, each gust a whisper of forgotten oaths, tearing at the silk of her gown until it clung like a second skin, heavy with melt and regret. She pressed deeper into the hollow, the lunar amulet a steady thrum against her breastbone, its crimson veins glowing faintly through the fabric, as if the moon itself sought to anchor her in this alien wild. The fire's warmth beckoned from below, a defiant pulse against the encroaching night, but fear coiled in her gut, instinct warring with the hollow ache of isolation. What was exile, if not the stripping bare of all illusions, leaving only the raw pulse of survival? The voices below sharpened, the Alpha King's timbre cutting through the wind like a blade honed on ancient grudges. Thorn Blackthorn moved among his warriors with the grace of a predator at rest, his fur-lined cloak billowing like raven wings, edged in frost that caught the firelight in silver shards. His face, scarred by battles long etched into legend, held a severity softened only by the shadows under his eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, carrying the weight of decisions that had cost him more than territory. He had risen to kingship not through blind conquest, but through the bitter forge of loss. A mate claimed by vampire treachery years ago, her blood spilled in a raid that left his pack fractured and his soul scarred. Guilt clung to him, like the snow to his boots, a silent companion in every council and charge. War was his duty, he told himself, a necessary fire to purify the lands, yet in quiet moments doubt gnawed. Was vengeance redemption, or just another chain? Ilara's foot slipped on an icy ledge, sending a cascade of powder whispering down the slope. The sound was faint, swallowed by the gale. But Thorn's head snapped up, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. Not wolf, not prey, something colder, laced with the metallic tang of eternity. "There!" he growled, his voice a rumble that stirred his men to motion, their forms blurring into half-shifts, claws glinting in the torchlight. Ilara cursed inwardly, her body coiling for flight, but the ridge crumbled beneath her. pitching her forward into the clearing with a graceless tumble that scattered snow like startled ghosts. She landed in a crouch, the impact jarring through her immortal frame, the amulet swinging free to catch the fire's glow. Eyes, dozens of them, feral and unyielding, locked upon her. The warriors encircled her in an instant, growls rising like a chorus of thunder, their breath steaming in the chill air. Ilara rose slowly, her pale skin luminous under the moon's fractured gaze, chin lifted in defiance despite the tremor in her limbs. The cold clawed at her, unfamiliar in its bite, but she met their stares with the quiet steel of one who had faced worse betrayals. "I seek no quarrel," she said, her voice steady, carrying the silken edge of her shadowed heritage. "Only passage through your storm." Thorn stepped forward, his presence parting the circle like a wave before a cliff. Up close he towered, his broad frame radiating heat that warred with the frost, the scent of pine smoke and earth rising from him like an invocation. His gaze raked over her, lingering on the amulet, the crescent moon pulsing with inner fire, its crimson heart a mirror to the blood oaths of old. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not just of her face, whispered in scout reports, but of something deeper, a pull that tightened his jaw. "The vampire princess," he murmured, the words laced with the gravel of restrained fury. "Exiled by your own, wandering into our jaws, fate's cruel jest, or a gift from the moon?" Ilara's breath caught, the amulet warming against her skin as if in response to his nearness, a forbidden spark igniting in the space between them. Fear twisted with curiosity. This king, whose raids had haunted her court's nightmares, did not lunge or strike. Instead, he studied her, the melancholy in his gaze, a chink in the armor of command. She saw it then, the wound not of flesh, but of spirit, etched in the faint tremor of his hand as it rested on the hilt of his sword. "I am no prize for your wars," she replied, her voice a thread of ice over silk. "Release me, and let the night claim its own." A warrior snarled, advancing with bared fangs, but Thorn's raised hand halted him, the authority in that gesture absolute. Born of packs, forged in fire and fidelity. "Bind her," he commanded, though his tone held no triumph, only the reluctant weight of strategy. Ropes of woven sinew encircled her wrists, rough against her skin, pulling her toward the fire's edge. The flames leaped higher, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the snow, the crackle mingling with the distant weavos that echoed her inner turmoil. Ilara struggled briefly, the amulet swinging like a pendulum, its light brushing Thorn's arm, a fleeting touch that sent an involuntary shiver through him, as if the moon had whispered a secret neither could yet name. They dragged her to the camp's heart, where furs were spread before the blaze, a makeshift throne for their king. Thorn sank onto it, gesturing for her to be seated opposite, the ropes tethering her like a relic of some ancient rite. The warriors retreated to the perimeter, their eyes watchful, but the air thickened with unspoken tension. Up close, the fire's heat thawed the edges of her chill, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath her poise, the way her fingers curled instinctively toward the amulet, seeking solace in its glow. Thorn watched, his own hand absently tracing a scar on his forearm, a twin to the one hidden beneath his tunic from the night his world shattered. "Why take me?" Ilara asked, her voice low, probing the melancholy she sensed in him. The wind howled outside the fire's circle, carrying flakes that melted on her lashes like unshed tears. "To start your war? My kin have cast me aside. I am no key to their gates." Thorn's eyes met hers, the storm within them mirroring the blizzard's rage. "You are a spark, princess, one that could ignite the veil between our worlds." Yet as he spoke, doubt shadowed his words, the guilt of past losses surfacing like blood in fresh snow. The amulet pulsed brighter, drawing his gaze, and for a moment the connection hummed, instinctive, denied, born of fear and the faint curiosity that bridged predator and prey. He turned away, barking orders for watch, but the seed was sown, fragile as a flame in the gale. As the night deepened, the camp settled into wary vigil, the fire's embers warding off the cold that pressed like an unseen foe. Ilara sat bound, the amulet her silent sentinel, its warmth a reminder that even in captivity, something stirred, a bond forged not in chains, but in the shared silence of wounds unspoken. The moon watched overhead, fractured yet enduring, as the first threads of empathy wove through the storm. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The fire's embers whispered secrets into the night, their glow etching fleeting maps of warmth across Ilara's bound wrists, where the ropes chafed like echoes of her brother's disdain. She sat motionless, the lunar amulet a quiet heartbeat against her chest, its crimson veins threading light through the shadows that clung to Thorn's furrowed brow. The camp had fallen into a tense hush, the warriors' forms silhouetted against the blizzard's relentless assault, their breaths sinking with the wind's mournful cadence. Ilara's immortal senses sharpened every detail. The crackle of logs succumbing to flame, the metallic undercurrent of blood from a recent hunt lingering on the air, the subtle shift in Thorn's posture as he paced the clearing's edge, his cloak snapping like a banner of unresolved storms. She should have felt only hatred for this captor, this king whose raids had painted her world's borders in scarlet. Yet, as the hours bled into the deepening frost, a reluctant curiosity stirred within her, mirroring the amulet's subtle pulse. Thorn did not gloat. His commands were laced with the weariness of one who bore the crown as both shield and shackle. When he returned to the fireside, sinking onto the furs opposite her, his eyes, storm-gray and haunted, met hers without the feral hunger she expected. "You carry the moon's mark," he said, voice low, gesturing to the amulet with a nod that betrayed no threat, only intrigue. Not the cold steel of vampire craft, but something older. Why does it burn for you, exile? Ilara's lips parted, the question pulling at the frayed edges of her guarded heart. No one had asked of her burdens since her father's passing. Her court had seen only weakness in her mercy. The ropes bit deeper as she shifted, but the pain grounded her, a reminder amid the surreal heat of his gaze. "It was my mother's," she murmured, the words tasting of long-buried grief. "A tether to what we lose in the endless night. Humanity, perhaps, or the light we vampires pretend to scorn." The amulet warmed under her words, its glow brushing the space between them, and for a fleeting instant Thorn's scarred hand twitched as if to reach for it, then fell away. He turned his face to the flames, the firelight carving hollows in his cheeks, revealing the guilt that shadowed his every decree. Before she could probe further, a distant howl pierced the gale, not the resonant call of his pack, but sharper, laced with the icy precision of vampire scouts. Thorn's head snapped up, his body coiling like a bowstring drawn taut. "They're here!" he growled, rising in a fluid motion that scattered embers like startled stars. The warriors mobilized in silence, their forms blurring into the night, axes and claws glinting under the fractured moon. Ilara's blood ran colder than the snow. Her brother's hunters, no doubt, sent not to reclaim her, but to erase the stain of her existence, lest her survival weaken their claims to purity. The wind carried their scent now, decay and frost, the unmistakable rot of the undead on the prowl. Thorn's eyes locked on hers, a flicker of calculation warring with something softer, unbidden. "Your kin come for you," he said, drawing a dagger from his belt, its blade etched with runes that hummed faintly in the amulet's light. He sliced through her bonds with deliberate care, the rope falling away like shed illusions. Ilara rubbed her wrists. The sudden freedom, a jolt that mirrored the chaos in her chest, Trust this wolf? Yet as shouts erupted from the tree line, shadows detaching into sleek, pale figures with eyes like polished onyx, she nodded, instinct overriding reason. "They won't stop at me," she whispered, rising to her feet, the silk of her gown whispering against the snow. "You'll be the spark they need for open war." The first vampire lunged from the gloom, claws extended like scythes, aiming for Thorn's throat. He met it midair, his shift partial and savage, fur rippling across his arms as he drove the beast back with a roar that shook the pines. Alara moved with him, her body a blur of ethereal grace, disarming another assailant with a twist that snapped bone, mercy forgotten in the visceral surge of survival. The amulet blazed now, its crimson heart illuminating the fray, casting the battle in hues of blood and silver. She felt Thorn at her side, not as captor but ally, his heat a counterpoint to her chill as they fought back to back, the rhythm of their movements sinking like breaths in shared exile. A scout broke through, pinning Alara against a boulder, its fangs grazing her shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood that welled dark and vital. Pain flared, sharp and grounding, but before terror could root, Thorn was there, hurling the creature into the fire with a force born of primal fury. Flames devoured the vampire in a shriek of agony, the scent of charred flesh mingling with the storm's metallic bite. He pulled Alara to her feet, his hand lingering on her arm, the contact electric, a bridge of warmth piercing her eternal cold. "Stay close," he urged, voice rough with exertion and something deeper, unspoken. In that moment, empathy cracked open between them, his guilt for losses past echoing her rejection, two wounded souls forging a fragile pact against the night. The skirmish ended as swiftly as it began, the remaining scouts fleeing into the blizzard's maw, their howls fading like defeated echoes. The camp smoldered, warriors tending wounds by the rekindled fire, but Thorn led Alara to a sheltered alcove beneath an overhang of ice-veined rock, away from prying eyes. He offered her a fur cloak, heavy with the scent of earth and pine, draping it over her shoulders without a word. She accepted, the weight a balm against the wind's relentless keening, and sank onto a bed of moss-dusted stone. The amulet cooled slowly, its light dimming to a steady ember, as if sated by their survival. "Why spare me?" Alara asked, her voice threading the silence, eyes searching his face in the fire's distant glow. Thorn knelt before her, cleaning a gash on his forearm with deliberate strokes, the blood staining the snow in ruby flecks that mirrored her own wound. "Because war's fire consumes all," he replied, his tone laced with melancholy, the king's mask slipping to reveal the man beneath, ethical, burdened by duties that demanded betrayal. "And you. You fight with mercy's edge, even now. It reminds me of what I've lost." His gaze lifted, holding hers, the connection deepening from curiosity to bond, resisted yet undeniable, like the moon pulling tides from shadowed depths. Alara felt it too, the pull, rationalized as alliance born of necessity, yet blooming with tenderness amid the pain. The wind howled outside their refuge, but within, a quiet unfolded, the amulet's warmth shared between them, symbol of wounds that might yet heal. What was strength, if not choosing trust in the heart of the storm? As the night wore on, the first threads of vulnerability wove tighter, empathy transforming fear into something perilously close to understanding under the watchful eye of the fractured moon. The alcove's icy embrace cradled them like a forgotten crypt, the overhang of frost-laced rock shielding their fragile truce from the blizzard's unrelenting lament. Alara drew the fur cloak tighter around her shoulders, its coarse warmth seeping into her chilled bones, a stark contrast to the eternal frost that had defined her existence. The lunar amulet rested heavy against her chest, its crimson veins now a subdued flicker, as if conserving its light for the revelations yet to unfold. Thorn sat across from her on the moss-strewn stone, his massive frame hunched in the dim glow of a single torch wedged into a crevice. its flame sputtering like a heartbeat on the verge of surrender. Blood from his wounds stained the snow at his feet, dark rivulets tracing patterns that mirrored the scars etched across his soul, reminders of the mate he had failed to protect, her life snuffed out in a vampire ambush that had ignited his endless vendetta. She watched him bind a gash on his thigh, his movements precise, yet shadowed by the melancholy that clung to him like mist. The air between them hummed with unspoken questions, thick with the scent of pine smoke and spilled blood, the distant howls of his pack weaving through the wind like threads of an unraveling fate. Ilara's rejection pulsed in her veins, a hollow echo amplified by this forced proximity to her sworn enemy. Yet in his eyes, she glimpsed a mirror to her own exile, a king burdened by duty's cruel calculus, where every victory tasted of ash. What was destiny, if not the moon's quiet insistence on mending what empires sought to shatter? The amulet stirred then, unbidden, its crystal warming against her skin as if awakened by the proximity of their shared wounds. Ilara gasped softly, her hand flying to it, fingers tracing the crescent's edge where crimson pulsed brighter, syncing with the ragged rhythm of Thorn's breath. He paused, his storm-gray eyes lifting to hers, narrowing as the light spilled forth, casting ethereal veins of red and silver across the alcove's walls. Shadows danced like spectral wolves, and for a moment the torch's flame bowed low, as if in reverence to an older power. "What sorcery is this?" Thorn murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper laced with awe and wariness, leaning closer despite the instinct that urged retreat. The heat from his body warred with the chill seeping from the stone, creating a cocoon of tension that pressed against Ilara's senses. The musk of his exertion, the faint copper tang of blood, the subtle tremor in his frame. It was no sorcery of her court, no dark incantation forged in the Crimson Veil's obsidian halls. This was her hidden gift, the Pathfinder's light her mother had spoken of in fevered whispers before the veil of death claimed her, a remnant of that tainted human blood, a bridge between worlds that vampires scorned as weakness. Ilara had always dismissed it as myth, a pretty lie to soften the sting of her hybrid curse. But here, in the heart of wolf territory, under a moon fractured by storm clouds, it manifested like a revelation from the goddess herself. The amulet's glow intensified, projecting faint visions into the air between them. Swirling mists of memory, not hers alone, but his. Flashes of Thorn's lost mate, her laughter echoing through sun-dappled glades before the vampire's shadows descended, fangs gleaming in the moonlight. He recoiled, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but the images held him captive, revealing the guilt he buried beneath layers of rage. The raid he had led too late, the choices that had cost her everything. "You see it," Ilara whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of discovery, the light bathing her face in crimson hues that made her porcelain skin seem alive with inner fire. The visions shifted, now showing paths untaken, alliances forged in blood pacts, wars averted by mercy's hand, a destiny where wolf and vampire stood not as foes, but as guardians of a fragile peace. Her gift unfurled like a rose in frozen soil, guiding the threads of fate, illuminating the moral crossroads where power yielded to compassion. Tears, rare, warm rivulets from her immortal eyes, traced her cheeks, freezing into delicate crystals that caught the amulet's glow. "It's not curse or weapon, it's sight, the moon's way of showing what must be chosen, not taken." Thorn's breath hitched, his scarred hand reaching out instinctively, hovering near the amulet without touching, as if afraid the light would burn away his armored resolve. The visions pierced him deeper now, revealing Ilara's own exile, her brother's sneer in the throne room, the court's whispers of impurity, the moment she chose mercy over vengeance and was cast into the wilds. He saw her as the key, not to war's ignition, but to his redemption, the half-blood princess whose light could heal the fractures in his pack, mend the wounds of betrayal that had cursed him to isolation. Guilt twisted in his gut like a blade, the melancholy that had defined his reign cracking under the weight of possibility. "All this time," he rasped, his voice breaking on the edge of vulnerability, "I thought you the spark to burn it all, but you're the path out of the dark." The admission hung between them, raw and resisted, his ethical core warring with the pull of destiny, a king who had rationalized conquest as duty, now confronted by love's quiet proof in the form of an exiled rival. Alara felt the bond deepen, the amulet's warmth spreading through her like liquid moonlight, thawing the ice of rejection that had encased her heart. Tenderness bloomed amid the pain, fragile as the visions fading into ether, leaving only the echo of what could be. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow in her chest. To embrace this gift meant forsaking her world's shadows, choosing the wolf's fire over eternal night. Thorn's gaze held hers, the storm in his eyes softening to something perilously close to hope, the air charged with the scent of thawing snow and unspoken promises. The wind howled beyond their shelter, carrying weavos that mourned the old ways. But within, the revelation settled like fresh powder, pure, inevitable, demanding a choice that could rebirth them both or doom them to the storm's embrace. As the amulet dimmed to a steady ember, Ilara reached out, her fingers brushing his, the contact a spark that ignited the philosophical core of their union. What was strength, if not yielding to the light that exposed our deepest fractures? The moon watched from above, its fractured face, a testament to destinies rewritten in blood and mercy as the first true vulnerability bridged the chasm between exile and king. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The dawn's feeble light clawed through the blizzard's remnants, painting the alcove in hues of bruised silver and reluctant gold, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness the fractures about to widen. Alara stirred from the shallow repose that passed for sleep among her kind, the fur cloak tangled around her like a lover's reluctant embrace, its warmth now laced with the earthy musk of Thorn's nearness. The lunar amulet lay cool against her skin, its crimson veins dormant after the night's revelations. Yet she felt its weight as a tether to the visions that had bound them, paths of mercy glimpsed in the glow, destinies that demanded more than survival. Her fingers traced the crescent's edge, the stone's subtle pulse echoing the turmoil in her chest. To heal this wolf king meant unraveling her own shadowed legacy, choosing light over the eternal veil that had both sustained and scorned her. Thorn was already awake, his silhouette etched against the overhang's icy drip, broad shoulders tense as he scanned the horizon where the Silverfang peaks loomed like jagged accusations. The wind had eased to a mournful sigh, carrying the faint clamor of his pack regrouping below, paws crunching snow, low growls of recounting the skirmish, the acrid bite of charred remains from the vampire scouts. He turned to her, his storm-gray eyes shadowed by the melancholy that revelation had only deepened, the guilt of his past losses now illuminated, impossible to ignore. "We can't linger," he said, voice roughened by the night's confessions, extending a hand gloved in worn leather. "My pack gathers at the frosthold. There, we face what your light has stirred, the old wounds, the betrayals that fester like rot in the roots." Alara rose, accepting his aid despite the instinctual recoil, the contact sending a shiver through her that had little to do with the cold. The amulet warmed faintly at their touch, a reminder of the bond they resisted, yet could no longer deny. Love's proof, not as reward, but as the forge of redemption. They descended the slope together, her silk gown whispering against the snow like a ghost's lament, Thorn's presence a shield against the wary stares of his warriors. The camp stirred to life, fires rekindled with fresh logs that snapped and spat, sending sparks spiraling into the pallid sky. But beneath the routine lay tension, a undercurrent of suspicion, as eyes lingered on the vampire princess walking unbound at their king's side. The march to Frosthold was a procession through winter's unforgiving cathedral. Endless drifts broken by ancient pines bowed under ice, their branches groaning like the bones of forgotten gods. Weavos echoed from the flanks, not triumphant, but edged with unease. The pack's loyalty to Thorn absolute, yet frayed by the scent of the undead trailing in her wake. Ilara felt it in their sidelong glances, the instinctive baring of fangs. Their alpha's vendetta against her kind was legend, forged in the blood of his mate, spilled by vampire blades in a raid that had claimed half his kin. Now she walked among them, her presence a living contradiction, the amulet's subtle glow peeking from beneath the cloak like a forbidden beacon. As the castle's spires pierced the mist, towers of glacial stone veined with silver runes perched on a crag like a crown of thorns. A scout burst from the tree line, fur matted with frost, eyes wild. "Rivals approach, my king," he panted, shifting to human form with a shudder that rippled muscle and sinew. "The Ironclaw pack, led by Garrick. They bear word of your alliance." Thorn's jaw tightened, the melancholy in his gaze hardening to steel, but Ilara caught the flicker of dread. The traitor within his ranks, whispered in the visions, a beta whose ambition had fed secrets to Garrick, fueling raids that weakened Thorn's hold. The great hall of Frosthold swallowed them whole, its vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, walls hung with tapestries of lunar hunts and bloodied moons, the air thick with the scent of oiled steel and smoldering hearths. Thorn's pack assembled in a semicircle, their forms a sea of fur-trimmed armor and scarred flesh, growls rumbling like distant thunder. At the hall's heart stood Garrick, rival alpha of the Ironclaw, his frame wiry and venomous, eyes gleaming with the avarice of one who craved the throne through cunning rather than honor. Flanking him were Thorn's own, banners of the Silver Fang lowered in deference, yet murmurs rippled like cracks in ice. "Brother," Garrick sneered, his voice a silken blade, stepping forward with a deference that mocked. "You've brought the Veil's whore into our sanctum. Is this the war you promised, or the surrender your guilt demands?" Thorn halted before the dais, Ilara at his side, the amulet pulsing hotter now, its light seeping through the fabric like blood from a fresh wound. The hall fell silent, breaths held in the firelit gloom, flames leaping in the massive hearth to cast elongated shadows that danced like specters of the past. Garrick's gaze raked over her, recognition dawning, the exiled princess, key to igniting the borders he coveted. But it was the traitor who stepped from the ranks, a beta named Rorik, his face pale with feigned loyalty, the scent of betrayal clinging to him like damp earth. "She bewitches you, my king," Rorik spat, voice trembling with ambition unveiled. "Her kind took your mate, now you consort with the poison." The confrontation erupted like a storm unleashed. Garrick lunged, claws extended, but Thorn met him with a roar that shook the rafters, their bodies colliding in a blur of fur and fang, alpha against alpha, the hall devolving into chaos as packs clashed, steel singing against bone, blood spraying the flagstones in arcs of crimson that steamed in the chill. Ilara pressed against the wall, heart pounding with a vitality she hadn't felt in centuries, the amulet blazing now, its visions assaulting her. Flashes of Rorik's treachery, whispers to vampire spies that had led to the mate's death, threads of deceit weaving through years of war. She moved through the fray, her grace a counterpoint to the savagery, disarming a Ironclaw warrior with a twist that spared his life, mercy her blade where fangs failed. Thorn grappled Garrick to the ground, pinning him with a knee to the throat, the rival's eyes bulging with hatred. "Yield," Thorn growled, blood trickling from a gash on his brow, mingling with sweat to trace rivulets down his scarred cheek. But Garrick laughed, a wet rasp. "Your pack crumbles, Blackthorn. Without war, you're nothing. Guilt's puppet, dancing to this half-breed's light." The words struck deeper than claws, Thorn's grip faltering as Rorik circled, dagger raised for the killing blow. Ilara's gift surged then, the amulet a supernova in her grasp, projecting the truth into the air. Visions of Rorik's betrayal, his pact with Garrick to usurp the throne, the vampire gold that had bought the mate's doom. Gasps rippled through the hall, warriors freezing mid-strike, the light exposing the rot. Rorik snarled, lunging at her, but Thorn intercepted, hurling the traitor into the hearth's embrace. Flames devouring him in a howl of agony, the scent of burning flesh choking the air. Garrick surged free, but the pack turned, loyal blades flashing to subdue him, chains clinking like the toll of judgment. Panting, Thorn rose, the hall bowing to him anew, but victory tasted of ash. He turned to Alara, eyes searching hers amid the blood-slicked stone, the amulet's glow fading to embers. "You could have let them fall," he murmured, voice laced with the weight of choice. "War would free you, back to your shadows, unbound." Freedom tempted, a siren's call to the exile's heart, yet love's proof anchored her. Forgiveness over vengeance, union over isolation. What was power, if not the mercy, to rebuild what hatred had torn? "No," she whispered, stepping into his warmth, the wind outside keening like a dirge for old ways. "The path is ours, together, or not at all." The hall echoed with the silence of reckoning, blood pooling under the moon's pale gaze through arrow-slit windows as the moral crossroads loomed. Forgive the fractures, or let war's fire consume the fragile dawn of redemption. Thorn's hand found hers, resisted no longer, the bond a quiet vow amid the storm's dying breath. Love as trial, demanding sacrifice before rebirth. The great hall of Frosthold hung in suspended breath, the air thick with the copper tang of blood and the acrid smoke of dying flames, where embers in the hearth whispered of judgments sealed in fire. Alara stood amid the carnage, her hand clasped in thorns, the lunar amulet a warm ember against her chest, its crimson veins threading light through the shadows that clung to the fallen banners like ghosts of old feuds. The pack's eyes, wary, reverent, fractured, turned to them, the silence broken only by the distant howl of wind threading through the arrow-slit windows, carrying the moon's pale gaze like a benediction or a curse. Blood pooled on the flagstones, dark mirrors reflecting the spires above, where the fractured orb watched their union with indifferent eternity. What was rebirth, if not rising from the ashes of betrayal, choosing the fragile weave of forgiveness over the sword's cold certainty? Thorn's grip tightened, his calloused fingers an anchor against the tremor in her immortal frame, the heat of his skin seeping through her like sunlight piercing eternal night. The melancholy that had etched his features now softened, guilt's heavy mantle cracking under the weight of her light, the visions that had exposed the rot, not to destroy, but to purify. Garrick lay chained in the corner, his snarls muffled by iron, the rival Alpha's ambition reduced to a hollow echo, while Rorik's charred remains smoldered in the hearth, a pyre for treachery's end. Yet victory rang hollow in Alara's ears, the hall's tapestries, woven with lunar hunts and crimson moons, seemed to bleed anew, reminding her of the wars her presence had nearly ignited. Her exile's sting lingered, a shadow in her veins, the crimson veil's rejection, her brother's venomous decree that had cast her into this frozen crucible. To embrace this wolf king meant sacrificing the shadows of her birthright, trading the veil's cold isolation for a destiny forged in shared fire. She pulled away gently, the amulet swinging free, its glow illuminating the scars on Thorn's arms, marks of raids past, each one a testament to the losses that had hollowed him. "The path you glimpsed," she murmured, her voice a silken thread amid the stone's chill echo. "It demands more than alliance. My kin will come, not with scouts, but legions, seeing my survival as weakness to exploit. And your pack." Her gaze swept the warriors, their forms etched in firelight, fur-trimmed armor stained with the blood of kin turned foe. They followed you into vengeance's maw. Can mercy crown what hatred built? The wind moaned outside, rattling the iron-banded doors like the restless spirits of the betrayed, and Alara felt the pull of freedom's temptation. Slip into the night, let war consume them both, reclaim her solitude where no heart could fracture again. Thorn's storm-gray eyes held hers. The ethical core of his soul laid bare, no longer armored by duty's relentless grind. He had kidnapped her as a pawn, a spark to justify the flames of retribution, rationalizing the act as the pack's salvation. But her light had unraveled him, revealing the guilt that festered like frostbite. The mate's death, not just a catalyst for war, but a mirror to his own failures, the choices that had prioritized power over the quiet bonds of compassion. I was the wound, he confessed, voice rough as gravel under boot. Stepping closer until the scent of pine smoke and earth enveloped her, a counterpoint to the metallic bite of blood on the air. Cursed by losses I avenged in shadows, blind to the moon's true call. Your gift showed me the sacrifice I evaded, not blood for blood, but yielding the throne's iron grip for something eternal. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the frozen tear tracks from the night's revelations, the touch igniting a warmth that thawed the eternal chill in her core, tenderness blooming like a rose amid thorns. The amulet pulsed brighter, its crimson heart sinking with their breaths, projecting no visions now but a subtle aura that bathed the hall in silvered light, easing the pack's growls into murmurs of awe. Warriors knelt, one by one, the Alpha's authority reborn not in dominance, but in the quiet strength of union. Alara felt the bond solidify, resisted no more, love as proof, a trial that demanded her hybrid blood's full surrender, bridging worlds where vampires and wolves had only known fang and claw. Yet the dilemma clawed at her. Compassion over power meant war's end, but at what cost? Her brother's legions massed beyond the peaks, scouts' howls rising like a dirge, drawn by the traitor's fall and the whisper of her survival. To heal Thorn's curse, to mend the pack's fractures with her Pathfinder's light, required a ritual under the moon, a blood oath that would bind her eternally, forsaking the Veil's shadowed throne for this glacial realm. As the first true dawn breached the horizon, gilding the snow-capped spires in reluctant gold, Alara made her choice. She drew a silver dagger from Thorn's belt, its rune-etched blade catching the amulet's glow, and pressed it to her palm, crimson welling forth, not the diluted ichor her kin scorned, but vital essence, warm and human-touched. For the wounds we carry, she whispered, offering her hand, the blood dripping onto the flagstones where it mingled with the night's spills, steaming in the chill like a sacred offering. Thorn mirrored her, slicing his own flesh, their blood intertwining in a pool that the amulet drank, its light erupting in a cascade of red and silver, weaving through the hall like lunar veins. Pain lanced through her, visceral and purifying. The wind outside falling silent, as if the goddess herself witnessed the rebirth. Exile transmuted to queenship, rejection to destiny's embrace. The pack howled in unison, a chorus of renunciation and renewal, the sound reverberating through frost-holed stones like thunder heralding peace. Thorn pulled her close, their wounds pressed together, the bond sealing in a surge of heat that chased away the cold forever. No war would come. Her light had revealed paths of alliance to the vampire envoys waiting in the passes, mercy's crown dethroning vengeance. In his arms, Alara felt the Renacimento complete. Love not as reward, but as the ultimate sacrifice, healing the Alpha's guilt with her own rebirth. Two fractured souls forged into one under the moon's enduring watch. The amulet cooled to a steady warmth, symbol of their union, as the dawn broke fully, painting the world in hues of promise amid the lingering snow. What was strength, if not the choice to let love's fire consume the old self, rising anew from blood and mercy's quiet flame? The hall filled with the pack's tentative cheers. the air alive with the scent of thawing earth and hope's faint bloom, as Thorn and Alara stood together, kings and queen of a destiny rewritten. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.